Wind worried at the gargoyles like a dog at a bone. The mouth of the castle faced the sea, and the sea was not soothed by any prayer. Night pressed low. The surf licked the black rock with cold tongues and withdrew to gather itself and return. In the high tower room where the shutters had been latched thrice and still creaked, a brazier hissed and spat while Salladhor Saan's rings clinked as his hands moved like bright fish in the firelight. "They will not come," the Lysine said, lounging as if the chair were a divan. "Or they will come with knives folded into their smiles." "They will come," said Stannis Baratheon, and his voice was as bare as his table. "They must." Davos Seaworth stood near the window with his fingers on the latch to still the wooden tremor. Storm's End had been cast of a wish and a folly, men said, a fortress raised in defiance of gods and elements. It kept its own weather, he had always believed that. Salt damp rhymed the shutters. Somewhere in the thickness of the walls, a gust moaned like a man's last breath. "Your Grace," Davos said, for he had learned long ago to set the title first and his thought after. "There are those who would treat a summons to a great council as a noose. The lion will not set his head in a loop." "The lion stuffed his cub on the throne," Stannis said. His eyes were heavy-lidded from lack of sleep, or from some inner weight that had never left him. "He will send an envoy." Tywin Lannister shies from noose and oath both. That is how he prospers. But even he knows there are some games you must enter into the open, lest the board be swept beneath you. Salladhor Saan laughed softly. "Some boards can be sold out from under you, and that also is a Lysine proverb. They say no, you look like a man with only paper for armor. A scrap of vellum will not turn an arrow. Hospitality binds what sells words do not," Stannis replied. "There will be no blood in my hall. A great council at Storm's End." He said it again as if to taste the metal of the words. The last great council was called at Harrenhal when the dragons were grown fat and their kings grown foolish. The realm chose. It will choose again. The flames tugged at the brazier mesh. The clatter of the shutter gave Davos all the excuse he needed to move from their eyes. He thought of a night against the walls with onions tied to his belt and fear tied to his spine. He thought of the gatehouse that had not yielded when nothing else could withstand such a siege, and of the hall that had taken him in when no other place would have had him. His thumb stumps ached in the wind. Some nights they felt the weather before the sky did. "If they come, Your Grace," Davos said, turning back. "If they come." His voice mixed the salt and smoke. "We must be as strong as they expect. Stronger in the way that is seen. That means banners and bread, seats and order. Seats nearest you for those you want nearest. Food the equal of any king's table so there's no talk of want. Call witnesses who have no reason to love you. Bring the faith. Bring the maesters." Salladhor rolled a ring along the knuckle of his thumb. "Bring the girls too and the singers. I would prefer a song if there are to be speeches from old men." Stannis ignored him. "The faith is half the reason for this," he said. "They called a bastard a king once before an altar. They can do it again or they can repent. I will set the High Septon before me and ask if his gods can tell gold from black. I will have Edric Storm stand there. I will bring the book. The book is at Dragonstone," Davos said quietly. "The one Maester Cresson kept. Hylas knows the histories. We can send a swift galley." "Send it," Stannis commanded, and the brazier hissed as if in approval. "Send two. I will not wait on the tide or on men's leisure. This is not a wedding feast where a bride may be late and the grumblings of men are soothed by wine. This is the choosing of kings. Men shall eat bread and salt, say their say, and be known. They will not be able to hide behind letters written in their names. They will not hire tongues finer than their own to declare for them. They will come in flesh or send whom they trust most. Either way we see them. And if they choose wrong?" Salladhor asked, smiling. Stannis's gaze was iron on the iron-laced window. "Then we will know them." Behind them in the doorway, the Red Woman watched without blinking. Davos could feel it before he heard her. The way heat can be behind you when you are not close to the fire. She wore no cloak and seemed to need none. The air liked her, or she did not notice its dislike. It will be in the open, Melisandre said, soft and bright both. Light belongs to the open places. That is where shadows are weakest. I will not have your talk of shadows in my hall, Stannis said, cutting halfway toward her. Nor your fires on my floors. I said no blood. Hear me well. Light needs no blood for men to squint, Melisandre answered. But there are flames that show truths when men dare to look. Do you wish your realm to choose in the dark? Or do you wish to light their eyes so they can see the dye upon the wool? Davos did not speak. The taste of smoke in his mouth was old. He saw again the thing that had slid from the woman in the cave, and he had to grip the latch hard. Enough, Stannis said, and the single word had a rattle of shield to it. The letters will go before dawn. Davos, I will have you carry the summons to the Marcher Lords. They will remember the blood of the Durandons even if the Reach does not. Son, you will put one of your nimble ships to the task for Dragonstone, and another to Oldtown. I will have an Archmaester here as well as a Maester. I want the Citadel's chains rattled in my hall. Melisandre. My king, she said, the red ruby at her throat pulsing as though a tiny heart beat there. I will watch the fires. They will tell me who sets foot upon the road before the Rav. Ens would admit it. No fires from which things crawl, Davos heard himself say, and immediately wished to gather the words back like spilling grain. He could not. Melisandre's eyes were the color of wine held up to sunlight. I am a woman, sire, she said. The flames birth only truths. Stannis made a thin sound in his throat. Go, all of you. I have an oath to write. The lamplight made the parchment yellow and the ink a wet black as Stannis sat to set his name and seal. Davos watched long enough to see the first scrape of quill. Then he went into the dark. The courtyard breathed mist. Armor thudded in the nearer shadows where men-at-arms drilled because they knew no other way to pass time. A groom walked a horse with his hands tucked into his armpits and his chin beneath his scarf. Beyond, the sea's teeth flashed pale. Davos moved between towers that seemed more like rain-swollen stumps than human works. He felt the weight of the fortress not above him but around and below. It wrapped you as snugly as a shroud. He remembered a boy in Flea Bottom staring up at a tower for the first time and wondering whether men had hands large enough to stack stones so high. Then he had learned to build with other things. Lies, fear, hope bundled like contraband under a cloak, and discovered that those towers held up as well. Ser Davos, said a voice from the task yard, and he turned to find Roland Storm, the bastard of Nightsong, picking his way across the puddled stones as if each puddle might be a trap. He was young for all his border hardness, a lean rope of a man with a knife of a smile. He had stood bearing Stannis' standard when others had not, and there was little sugar in him. The garrison's steady? Davos asked. Roland nodded. Steady as a rock in a storm. They know the Stormlands will look to see whether the old oaths still mean something. They know the king's eyes will be on them. They know Edric Storm sleeps under this roof. They know I will hit them if they forget. Good. Davos pulled his cloak closer. We will need every man to remember why Storm's End was raised. Not for glory, for defiance. It is a particular sort of oath defiance is. Roland looked past Davos at the sea and grinned without joy. I have never liked guests in my house. They might knock over the salt cellar and then all the bad luck is yours. Set more salt, Davos said. We will need it. Letters went like gulls out from the towers. Before sunrise the Ravenry was a storm of black wings. And by the time the first pale of day ran itself thin along the horizon the last scroll had flown. Davos took 3 letters and a small escort down the steep road to the stables. He felt lighter once he was on a good horse with a true task. Motion was honest work. The land east of Storm's End was a quilt of winter-black fields and hills like sleeping hogs. The wind dropped as they left the promontory, and the cold went with it, as if the land itself were grateful to be away from the sea. By mid-morning they were passing through the scrub and poor woods toward Nightsong and the Marcher baronies beyond. He had no banner and no flourish, only the king's seal and his own face, which more than one gate sergeant knew from the onion stink of old tales. He put Stannis' summons beneath the noses of lords who had known him as a smuggler and those who had known him only as a curious knight with a peasant's hair, and in both sorts of eyes he saw the same thing. A twitch at the word Great Council, and something like a blend of hunger and fear. "Storm's End thinks itself Harrenhal," said a red-faced lord whose casque was dented anew every season. "The Reach will never come. The Lion will wipe himself with your parchments." But he took the parchment. "The Vale has no taste for other storms," said a lady whose hair was iron gray though her mouth held color. "Lisa Arryn will not come, but she sent a cousin." "Send a safe conduct, a strong one," said a lord from the Dornish marches. "We all have long memories of old slaughters at truce tables." He took the safe conduct with his forefinger and thumb as if the letters might burn him. When Davos smiled faintly, he added, "I will come. I won't say yes to you till I have heard, and I won't say no till I've seen your face when men disagree with you. That is fair." By the time Davos rode back through Storm's End's gatehouse with mud up to the horse's belly and a taste of turnip stew still clinging to his teeth, the keep had already changed its shape. The core of the fortress remained a squat defiance, but banners had sprouted like late-season flowers. The Baratheon-crowned stag flowed gold and black from a high pole above all, but beneath it and along the ramparts and in the yards other colors showed themselves in the gray day. The 3 cups of Cairn beside the striding huntsman of Tarly, the blanch and green of Rowan and the mallet of Manderley on deep blue even though the man himself was far away north, the bronze and iron circle of House Royce flanking the trident and the leaping trout of Tully, though Riverrun's lord lay Abed and Scent, his kin. There was the smoke griffin of Celtigar on white, the Ben Sinister of Connington struck out but still there on an old surcoat because men used what they had, the red apple of Fossaway. 2 red apples in truth, one armored in green and one in red, because families divided as apples do. There were even 3 silver seahorses sewn on black velvet for a Valerian envoy, looking like fish gone to a funeral. The first men to arrive came hungry and tired and with their guards heavy-eyed. The kitchens filled with steam and shouts. The river of fish and loaf and roasting meat rushed without relent. Davos saw to salt and to benches, to the way the seats arranged themselves beneath the dais. The closer to the king, the more honor. He had never placed such things before, but he knew a ship's deck and how weight distributes. Place a wrong piece and the whole craft lists. He put the Royce man near the Tully cousin and away from the Reach envoys who muttered in tight clusters. He placed the Manderley man, a steward of a steward, but fat with confidence, near the Faith's emissaries so they could whisper of oaths. He gave the Dornish marcher a place where he could see and be seen, but not speak first. He made certain that there was a high-backed chair on the dais for the High Septon, should the man himself deign to come, and another for an Archmaester, for the Citadel had replied to the king's request with haste, sending Archmaester Valen with 5 links bright with the medals of lineage and law. The first true test arrived in green. Mace Tyrell did not come. Davos had expected that. Instead the Reach sent a bouquet of roses and thorns. Lord Mathis Rowan in a cloak whose embroidery shone with such perfection that the stitches themselves might have been polished. Ser Randall Tarly with his jaw like the edge of a blade and his disdain for every mouthful of Stormland's bread stamped on his face for any to see. The Redwine twins half sour and half sweet, and Lady Olenna's eyes behind another's veil, because Old Town lay within reach and rumor walked faster than ravens. Ser Loras Tyrell rode with them, and the moment he passed beneath the portcullis every man in the yard felt the air change. The boy had beauty and steel both, and grief that sat on him heavier than his armor. He was not in white. That would come later in some other sun. He wore green enameled plate and a rose-spiked helm, and the standard-bearer at his side kept the Reach's banner snapped tight as if by force of arm. "You have safe conduct," Davos said to them at the gatehouse, and little as his voice weighed, it had the king's seal upon it. "You have bread and you have salt. If any man breaks guest right beneath this roof, I will hang him from the sea-facing parapet so that the gulls can open him and the sea can take him. Remember it." Randall Tarly's mouth moved as if he were chewing something very sour. Ser Loras did not speak to Davos at all, but when he took the bread he looked up, and the Prince of Onions felt that gaze as a prickling under his skin. There was a question in it, and the question was, "Are you a monster's man?" From the east came bronze and old honor. Lord Yon Royce's armor seemed made of an earlier day, and the lines of his face did not allow for anyone else's fables to rest there. He came with 2 sons and a young man from Gulltown who kept little papers folded in his glove. "Lady Lisa will not leave the Eyrie," Royce said by way of greeting to Davos on the inner steps. "She grows a mote of air around herself and the boy, but she cannot keep the whole veil aloft. My oaths to Storm's End are older than hers to grief." From the river road came Brynden Tully. Davos had never met the man but knew him the moment he saw him. Gaunt as a pike and still like a cat that has not spent its last leap. He rode in with half the men any knight of his renown might have, as if to remind the realm that the Tullis valued courtesy over bluster. "My lord brother has no strength for journeys," the Blackfish said to Davos, dismounting. "My nephew is at war far off and cannot leave his chosen field. But a council is a river, sire. If you leave the river to the men who do not fish, they will tell you how to fish and keep all the fish for themselves. I am here to see how the current runs." From King's Landing came gold thread and thin mouths. Lord Giles Rosby coughed the whole way through the yard and had to be steadied by 2 younger men, whose faces said they wished he would die of it, so they could be on to more pleasing work. Ser Osmond Kettleblack came as part of their guard and winked at the pretty scullions. More importantly, Lord Kevin Lannister rode with them, red cloak edged with black, his hair thinning but his gaze steady. He had the look of a man who had seen a camp cut down to stumps more than once and never learned to enjoy it. He offered Davos a measured nod and no worthless courtesies. "My brother sends his representatives," he said, and used the word brother the way a man might when laying down a card he knows can take the trick. "He holds that this summons is unlawful and will say so, but he holds also the value of hearing out a man in the open. He says that he trusts nothing in the dark." His eyes flicked toward one red figure in a passageway when he said it. Davos saw that flick and tucked it into the pocket where he kept small truths. Old Town sent a brightness of chains. Archmaester Valen had hair like new salt and a face that refused to be hurried. He felt the stones as he walked as if taking their measure as much as they were taking his. With him came Septon Lucian of the most devout, fleshy and careful, and 4 lesser Septons, one of whom had eyes like a startled horse. "The High Septon sends his blessing," Lucian said, fingers folded on his belly. He would have come himself if the way were not so unkind. But he knows that the faith's eyes will be upon this hall. He let the last word dangle. Hall, not altar. Other men had sovereign rights too. Salladhor Saan stole gold with his smile in the yard all afternoon, and Davos stole small frictions out of the way. Shifting benches, raising a pitcher of wine here, making sure a man from the Blackwater Rushes did not sit next to a man whose brother he had killed. From the half-landing of the great stairs, Melisandre watched it all as if she were a queen looking down on an early harvest and judging whether the sheaves would be enough. Edric Storm ran late into the evening through the passages with 2 squires at his heels and a dog of some gray marsh breed that adored him. The boy's hair had the Baratheon black and took fire in what light there was. His brow belonged to a king even if the law would never let him wear it. He had the careless joy of 14 years and none of the guilt of being born where he had not been invited. When Davos pressed a hand to his shoulder to slow him, Edric laughed up into his face as if to say, "Old knight, there are rooms you haven't found yet." The first night before the council, Stannis held no feast. He shared bread with such of the lords as had already come in an anteroom off the hall and drank watered wine. He stood while others sat, as if to tell them that the day would be long but he would not be any shorter by it. He spoke very little. The work of speech would be later and heavier. Davos sat at the edge of the dais with his back to a pillar and thought of how he had sat on many edges, of skiffs, of wares, of a gallows in his mind. Men's voices moved in and out of his hearing. He heard Lord Mathis Rowan saying, "Storm's End is stout and true, Lord Stannis, but a council has always been called at the King's Place." To which Stannis replied, "A king's place is where the king is," so flatly that the sentence fell like a platter, rim to table. He heard Randall Tarley say, "We will hear the laws spoken, and then we will see what the mummers show is worth." I have little patience for talk of what color a child's hair might be when I have seen men with hair as black as pitch, father children as golden as wheat, and watched Valen's eyebrows rise and stay there, unamused. He heard Lady Olenna's cousin through a veil remark in a voice that did not match her softness. All men prefer babies with good hair, and he heard Lord Kevin Lannister say to Septon Lucian with careful respect, "If the faith would be kind enough to recall how easily blood spills when men are made to feel that their gods are not welcome, we would all be grateful." Davos stored that too with the other small truths. The Lannisters had learned something from the last time they opened their doors to zealotry and closed them upon a riot. Men who lived never liked to die the same way. At last the king waved them all away and stood alone for a moment with his hands on the back of the chair that would be his on the morrow. Davos went down the dais stairs and stopped a few paces before him. "Your Grace," he began. "You have been a thorn and you have been a whetstone," Stannis said without preamble, his gaze traveling over the empty benches as if measuring ghosts. "Keep being both. If any man breaks guest right here, strike him. If any man looks to his sword instead of his seat, strike him. I'll have no blood on my floor. I know too well what blood can do when it runs crooked." He did not look toward the shadow in Davos's mind, and Davos did not speak it aloud. He only bowed and said, "Good." The day of the council poured itself gray out of a crack in the sky. The sea did not change its voice, but it took to backing away from the land a little farther before each forward rush. Perhaps it was listening. Storm's End's great hall filled as if the rock itself had exhaled men. Banners were planted, the stag high above them all. A line of candles set along the walls made the light flutter and dance upon shields and cheeks. The smoke stained the air as if argument had already started and stained it. Stannis took his chair on the dais. He wore plain black and not the crimson that Melisandre favored. His circlet was iron set with a single sapphire. When he sat, the murmur settled. On his right, the high-backed chair kept for the faith stood empty until Septon Lucian took it and coughed into his sleeve twice, softly, and folded his hands. On Stannis's left, Archmaester Valen's chain glimmered as if all the metals were in quiet conversation. Davos stood a pace behind and to the side, not upon the dais but not among the crowd either, the place he had always occupied in the world. "Lords and ladies of the Seven Kingdoms," Stannis said. He did not shout. His voice carried because it knew where to go. "You were summoned to Storm's End to choose. Some of you hold that there is no choosing to be done, that the thing is already settled. I say that when the thing is settled by murder and mendacity, it is not a thing that honors any oath we have sworn. I say that a king must be chosen by law and by the will of the realm, not by the will of one house's rapacity or another's ambition. I say that we cannot have two kings, and we cannot leave the matter to plague us for another generation. We will hear the laws. We will hear proofs. We will hear the faith. Stout men will speak where other men hear them. And then we will choose. We will do it in the open." Randyll Tarly stood. Even his standing was a correction. "By what right do you call a great council, Lord Stannis?" Stannis's mouth tightened. "By the right that my house has to call the Stormland lords to weather what must be weathered. By the right that belongs to anyone whose claim is named and whose cause is real, when the realm itself is threatened by confusion and calamity. By the precedent of Harrenhal when there were many claimants and the dragons slept. I am not the first to call such a council. I will not be the last. If you object to my right to call you to a council, Lord Tarly, rise and leave. But know that if you stand again in my hall after you once stand to defy it, I will take it as your acknowledgement that this council holds weight." A murmur moved in the benches like wind in ripe barley, soft but not quiet. Tarly held Stannis's gaze a heartbeat longer, then sat back down. His jaw remained iron. "Archmaester Valen," Stannis said, "we will begin with the laws. Speak to the realm." Valen rose, finger tucked between pages already inked with his own notes. He had a voice built for recitation. "Your graces and your lordships," he began, acknowledging even those who had not received such styles from this man's mouth before. "The succession of the Iron Throne has not always been simple. It is, nonetheless, a matter of law. The Targaryen practice, drawing upon Undul custom and Valyrian inheritance, gives primacy to the firstborn legitimate son of the reigning king, followed by his male siblings in order of birth, followed by daughters if no male heirs exist, with consideration given to the Great Council's will when the line grows tangled or fails. The Baratheon claim descends from Orys Baratheon, a legitimized half-brother to Aegon the Conqueror, and was strengthened by the marriage of Lord Stephen Baratheon to Cassanna Estermont under the reign of Aegon V. When Robert Baratheon took the crown by force from Aerys II, he did so with the assent of a council of lords and the general acceptance of the realm, with a claim bolstered by kinship to the Targaryen line as well as right of conquest. He paused to let the wells of agreement fill where they might. In the present matter, the question is not which son of a king should inherit, but rather who is in fact a king's son. The law is clear that bastards, being begotten out of wedlock, have no claim to inheritance unless legitimized by royal decree or great council, and even then the rights of those born on the lawful side of the sheets are to be considered first. The Queen's children by King Robert are either legitimate, being born within a lawful marriage, or they are not, if the marriage was not in truth fruitful. It is not for me to declare the truth of that question. It is for me to say that if there is doubt about paternity, if the parentage is in question, then evidence must be weighed. We have precedent. Randall Tarley rose again. We know the law, Archmaester, he said, brusque as a chopping block. Get to the heart and stop dressing it. Precedent, Valen repeated, unflustered. In the case of Alan Valerion's bastardy and the dispute over the Driftmark succession, bastardy and heir were both weighed. In the case of the Blackfire rebellions, the question of legitimization was weighed. In the matter of Mern Gardner's line dying with him on the field, custom was laid aside for necessity. In each case, the realm decided in the open. There was testimony. There was witnessing. There were oaths. I propose that we hear testimony about the question that bears on all others, whether Joffrey Baratheon, Myrcella, and Tommen are the trueborn children of King Robert and Queen Cersei. And I propose that we then hear on whether Stannis Baratheon, as the eldest surviving brother of King Robert, holds claim if that first branch proves rotten. Lord Kevin stood, precise. My brother maintains that even to pose the question in this hall is treasonous slander against the late king and his queen. Your queen, someone said from the benches in a whisper that was not quiet at all. Kevin did not flush. The queen and her children are under the protection of the Iron Throne, which this man claims. That is what we are doing here, I am told. Speaking of crowns, I am here, are you not grateful? I will speak plainly, too. The small council at King's Landing is prepared to send witnesses of its own. The Grand Maester in chains to the Citadel, the Gold Cloak's commanders, the keepers of lineage records in the Red Keep, and others who can say that the king looked upon his son and called him so. But I think, Lord Stannis, that this exercise is not one of proof for you. Proof you have in plenty in your own mind, but rather an exercise of forcing men to say things they cannot later deny saying when the field is won. I wish you luck, but know that no man can be forced in his heart, only outwardly. Davos watched Stannis's jaw harden. If men will not say what they believe, they will not be kings. If men like you try to hold a house up with gold bars and tapestries and refuse to see that the stones beneath are cracked, that is your affair. I will have the proofs and the testimonies. If you will not send Pycelle, then Valen will do. Melisandre glided forward then and placed a hand softly on the table below the dais. Her sleeves slid back and showed the smooth skin of her forearms. There is another proof, she said, pitched for the room and not much louder. There is a proof that no paper refutes and no lion's roar can drown. Stannis's fingers tightened on the arm of his chair. No, he said flatly. There will be no fire visions here. It is not vision, Melisandre answered. And if her smile was a flame, it was the sort that a moth could not resist. It is light upon truth. Let us look upon the king's book. Let us look upon the boy. She turned, and Edric Storm, already present with a pair of stewards and clearly trying not to fidget, straightened as if a string had been tugged. Let the realm look upon and remember, O lords. She went on, the slight lilt of her home in her words where men here heard none. Seed follows seed, as blood follows blood. You have seen that in your kennels and in your vineyards. You know it when your sons are born and you pretend surprised that they resemble their uncles. Look upon this boy, the king's son, Robert's blood. The stag's strength lives in him and cannot help but show itself. It showed itself in all the king's byblows. It ought to show itself in his heirs if they are his. If, Randall Tarley said, biting the word. Bring forth the red book, said Stannis, sharply enough that one of the pages sprang to fetch it as if stung. From a chest beneath the dais, Pylus, borrowed from Dragonstone for this, produced a volume bound in cracking leather and set it upon the table with reverent care. He opened to a place his finger had already marked. Lineages and histories of the great houses of the 7 kingdoms, said the young maester, nervous and eager both, compiled under King Robert by Maester Mauleon, with additions by Maester Cresson of Dragonstone. The matter at issue, his finger trembled down the column, where it concerns the breeding of Baratheon and Lannister lines, the consistent issue of such unions over 200 years, black of hair. The seed is stubborn, Valen said gently, making of it a general truth instead of a catchphrase. Black begets B. Black more often than not. There are rare deviations, but rare is not frequent, and when all 3 children share the less likely trait. Golden, Kevin said, the hair of Lon the Clever and of the Rock. Yes, we know our own line's legends too, Maester. Then the question arises, Valen finished. We have more than hair, Davos heard himself say, surprising even his own tongue. He stepped 1 pace forward. The words felt like coins that had warmed in his pocket and now must be spent. We have the word of the hand who died for telling it. Eddard Stark. A hush like the farthest withdrawal of surf spread and held. Davos had never seen men lean forward like that without moving from their places. You have a letter? Kevin asked at once, sharper than before. No, Davos said, too honest for his own ease. A dead man leaves few letters the Lannisters do not collect. But we have the word of men he entrusted. The lords of the Riverlands have heard tell of it. The household at Dragonstone has heard it. He confronted the queen and lived only long enough to die for it. He died rather than bless a bastard. A hard northern man may be wrong, but he is not easily moved to throw away his head on a whim. Brynden Tully stood without seeking any man's permission. My brother-in-law was as hard as winter oak, he said, and he was not given to mouthing rumors. He came to us with this in his bones. He died with it. My niece was wed to the boy who now sits where we are told kings sit. She was a child and learned to be more than a child in a fortnight. His mouth went thin. We have bled for less reasons. We will not bleed for none. Randall Tarley turned to him. And yet you claim the north and much of the Trident for a boy who calls himself king with hair brown as a river reed. King in the north. Came a murmur from more than one bench, and Davos could not have told you from which direction it started. The north has taken itself from this question, another murmured, and that one may have come from the Dornish marcher who had spoken to him on the road. We are one realm still, Septon Lucian said under his breath in a way that made it sound staged to be overheard. Gods forbid we be not. Stannis lifted a hand and the half-dozen murmurings fell. This council is called for one purpose, he said, to choose the rightful king of the 7 kingdoms. If someone wishes to argue that there should be fewer kingdoms, do it later. If someone wishes to argue for more, do it later. If someone wishes to say there should be no king. Here he shot a stony look toward the men in the corner who wore dark clothing that did not quite match any lord's color, and Davos realized only then that the Night's Watch had sent 2 men to be present, old Donal Noy's nephew among them, black as crows with snow still clinging to their boots. Then you have chosen poorly where to come. This is not a moot. It is a council. We are not wildlings. A scatter of laughter met that. Even Stannis would use a jest if there was justice in it. Let testimony be given, Valen said, and they proceeded as if walking a line drawn on the floor. There were the keepers of the king's hunting logs, who spoke of Robert visiting his bastards when he was drunk enough to weep and of his only joy being in boys who reminded him of boys. There was a midwife from the city's underwaist brought under guard because the queen's men had once tried to silence her. who had delivered a child with black hair from a girl whose belly had known a king. There was a quiet steward from Casterly Rock itself whose eyes flickered to Lord Kevin and then away. He admitted that every Lannister child in living memory had come pale and gold. There were 2 guardsmen from the Red Keep who had seen brothers and sisters join hands more often and more intimately than siblings ought, though they were careful with their words and their eyes slid away from the veiled lady from the Reach who seemed to know all their evasions ahead of time. Through it all, Kevin Lannister stood like a tree enduring winter, unbending but not breaking. When it was his turn, he did not grow red and he did not shake. "I say this," he said, "that Robert Baratheon had many faults, but he acknowledged his sons when he wished. He grew a habit of seeing in boys what he wanted to see. He called Joffrey his son. He named him in open court. He sat him on his lap and fed him from his own trencher. I have watched them together. You cannot have missed it if you were in that hall and had eyes. I think this exercise serves the purpose of covering one man's ambition in a cloak of legality. That is not new. But do not pretend to yourselves that this is entirely about law. It is about old slights and new hopes. Everything in this world is about old slights and new hopes," Lady Olenna's cousin said dryly into her veil. "Laws are woven from them both. Else why would we need laws at all?" Valen cleared his throat gently. "If it please the assembly," he said, "we have heard testimony. We have seen the child of the king and the woman who birthed him." He looked at Edric Storm, who stood straight and looked trying not to preen. "We have the book and the precedent. We have the faith here to hear us. There remains a question of safety for those who might speak against powerful men. The promise of guest right stands. The question becomes, if we hold that Joffrey and the others are not Robert's get, then the lawful succession passes to Stannis Baratheon, as the eldest surviving brother of the late king. There is no lawful bar to this in the absence of another Targaryen claimant. House Baratheon's line replaced House Targaryens by common acclaim and bloody force. That is the fact. In the absence of a legitimized bastard and the presence of an elder brother, the law is simple." "Nothing is simple," Stannis said harshly. "Loyalty is simple. Law is iron. Men bend it until it looks like ribbon. The faithless twist till they can hang their enemies with it. But it is iron. I will be king not because you find me likable and not because I flatter you and not because I sit a horse prettily. I will be king because I am the rightful king. Say so with your mouths. And if your hearts lag behind, they will learn their duty later." Randall Tarly stood. "I say that Joffrey is king," he said, unadorned. "That is what I say with my mouth and what I believe in my heart. Not because I love lions. I do not. Not because their debts have been paid in any hall I care for. Mine have not. But because a realm torn from end to end cannot afford to have sons' rights questioned because a book says black more often than gold." "Then what are you doing here, Lord Tarly?" Davos asked before he could stop himself, and felt Stannis's head turn. A slow hinge of iron. Tarly looked at Davos the way a huntsman looks at a dog that brings back the bird but chews it on the way. "I came because one does not ignore a summons from Storm's End when one's fathers have sworn oaths to it," he said. "I came because if one man decides to name himself king without hearing others, that is one thing, and if he asks the realm to call him king and is refused, that is another. Now you will have your answer and can hang men more honestly for treason after, if that is your wish." He sat. The room breathed. Lord Yohn Royce stood. "I say that Stannis Baratheon is the rightful king," he said, as if naming a mountain. "Not because I love him. He is not lovable. Not because I think he will be a bountiful lord. He will pinch and prune and push. But because law is law and we are men who live by law. I have sons. If men set their own comforts above law, our sons will live in a realm where every comfort is taken by the man with more swords. We had that once. It was called the Age of Heroes, and there were no laws but strength. I prefer our little laws now. The thing spread. Like dye in water, you could see where it touched. Men who had waited to see whether someone too great to be ignored would speak now cleared their throats and rose. A Fossaway, said I. A Florent, smelling home advantage, shouted I too loudly and looked foolish. The Manderley man wiped grease on his sleeve and said in a voice like a choir's bass, I and the sound went around the walls. Ser Garland Tyrell was not present. He was elsewhere fighting as if with both hands. But Ser Loras sat very still and did not speak, though he watched each mouth, measuring. Kevin Lannister did not rise as others did, but instead said to the air, "My brother will not accept this." It was not threat. It was truth. It floated and settled like soot. Septon Lucian rose somewhat reluctantly. "The faith hears the law," he said, his voice wanting to go to soothing and not finding any place for it to sit. "It hears the precedents. It hears the testimony. The gods do not speak in our ears, though men claim always that theirs do. We have to do with books and prayers. This seems to point one way. If the realm chooses so, the faith will bless a coronation. It would prefer not to have the September of Baelor burned around its ears while doing so." He offered the faintest smile. Few found it amusing. Then a thing happened that turned the air sideways. The dog that adored Edric Storm began to growl low, a sound like a pot on the boil. The boy's hand went to its head and soothed, but the growl deepened. A movement near the back of the hall. A cluster of men in the livery of the Kettleblacks, parted just enough for a shadow to be seen slipping toward the stair at the side of the dais. Davos stepped without thinking. He had done so on ships when a deck moved under him and a rope went taut in a way that promised to bite. He moved into the angle of the stair and his hand fell on cold metal. The man there had a crossbow, not held up and proud but hidden low and clever, pointed along the angle of the steps so that a shot would find Stannis' thigh or gut. Davos's hand closed around the fore end, and for a heartbeat the two men made a statue of argument. Then the man bared his teeth. Manners have their logic, but so do hands. Davos wrenched. The crossbow went off with a short, spiteful thunk, and the bolt leapt not into King's flesh but into a pillar with a sound like a stopped heart. The hall's breath rose in a single cry. Davos headbutted the man, not a knightly trick but an alley one, and felt the crunch of nose beneath his brow. He spanned the crossbow and flung it aside. A sword came from somewhere. Another hand grabbed. There were boots slipping on spilled wine. The dog barked high and fierce. "Hold!" Stannis' voice sliced. "Hold! Damn you all!" Guardsmen of Storm's End swarmed like ants, and the man with the crossbow was pinned face down on the stairs with 3 bodies on him. Another man tried to run through the press and failed, tripping on a bench and going down under Randall Tarley's weight, because the Lord moved with that grace men who have trained long have. Ser Loras had his sword half out and his eyes all over the Red Woman, who had not moved at all. Kevin Lannister's face closed like a gauntlet. Septon Lucian grabbed his chair arms and made a tiny high sound like a pipe. Davos pushed to his feet, breath hard. He saw a small scrape of blood upon the steps from the man's nose and the crossbow bolt jutting from the pillar thick as a thumb and ugly as truth. "You see," Randall Tarley said into the crackling silence, his mouth a slash. "This is what councils bring. If the man were king already, there would be no debate and no bolts." "Ser Davos saved me a limp," Stannis replied with icy equability, as if awarding praise were a chopping of wood. "We will proceed. Take the men to the dungeons. They will talk, and if they do not, someone will talk for them. When guest right is broken, a man has declared himself outside our laws. I will have names." Kevin Lannister's eyes met Stannis's for one moment then. If the Re was any speaking in that gaze, it was a language born of shared long years on other battlefields, where arrows were as common as meals. "I did not send these men to shoot you," Kevin said aloud to the hall, slow and exact. "But I am honest enough to say that someone did, and that the someone imagines himself clever enough not to be found." Melisandre inclined her head in a way that made Davos certain she had known where the bolt would fly an hour before it did. "Shadows grow long where light is bright," she said to no one and everyone. "We must hurry, or night will choose for us." "Then vote," said Lord Yohn Royce. "Stop talking and call the question. We are not in a maester's chamber any longer." Archmaester Valen took a breath as if to smell the air one last time for omens of reluctance. "By houses, by banners, by blood," he said. "Stand when your house chooses and say your choice. It went as slowly as a child learning to walk and as fast as a fire crossing thatch. The stout Stormland's houses stood first, Cunnington's old men, even with the line in disrepute, taking courage in the precedence of a former loyalty. Selmy's kin without Selmy himself, ashamed that their best sword served elsewhere and newly steel-spined in other ways. Estermonts as prickly as their lord's eyebrows. The Vale stood in fragments. The Royces and their sworn declared for Stannis with their bronze certainty. Other houses stayed carefully seated with eyes on an Eyrie that was not present. The Riverlands came in with measured tread. Tully by the Blackfish's mouth, the Mallisters through messages carried at dawn, the Freys with 3 men each saying something different with a Frey's practiced duplicity and achieving only to look like fools before all. The Reach split like a loaf torn by strong hands, Rowan with his lawfulness reluctantly bending towards Stannis, Tarly opposing, Redwine twins arguing which of them should stand only to find themselves still in their seats when the moment passed. Oldtown's representatives looked to the faith and then to Valen and stood for the law. The West's men stood for the boy king, of course, solid and unembarrassed, led by Kevin's that does not tremble. Some Crownlands houses wavered and then crept to the side that seemed most like peace. Others, lords with names that had never reached far beyond the Rose Road, looked at the floor and did not move. The Dornish marchers were half for and half against, which is to say they enjoyed the edge as always. When it was time to know, the knowledge came like a bell rung. There was no exact count that would satisfy those who would never be satisfied, for not all houses were present and not all present were equal in weight. But the seeing of it was what mattered. Men had stood where men could see them, and the realm had a shape. By the judgment of this council, Valen said, by the law and by the testimony and by the witness of the faith. By the witness of the faith, Septon Lucian said, rising a little, pale and bold, and the prayers of the faithful. It is declared that Stannis of House Baratheon is the lawful king of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, lord of the 7 kingdoms and protector of the realm. Silence fell at that, deep and uncanny. The sea hit the rocks in the silence, and a gull cried and was silent also as if chastened. Stannis did not smile. His face did not change at all. He reached out and set his palm upon the iron sapphire circlet on the table. Then I will be one, he said, barely louder than a man telling a scribe where to set a word, and we will see what being means. He lifted the circlet and set it upon his brow. Septon Lucian, to his credit, had the sense to step forward without waiting to be begged. He spoke the old words, careful not to include implorations that the 7 would witness any burning of any kind. He spoke of the weight of justice and the steadiness of law like handrails on a stair that men feared might betray them. He made the sign of the star. The candles along the wall guttered, as if to make a point, and went on burning. Men who had stood against Stannis shifted in their boots and blinked as if ash had blown into their eyes. Men who had stood for him looked a little surprised that nothing had fallen from the ceiling or leapt from the floor. That is the way of moments large and small, Davos thought. You expect thunder. Mostly you get the soft drumming of rain. Kevin Lannister bowed his head half the width of his neck. I will take this back to King's Landing, he said. I will advise my brother to consider. He will not consider, but I will advise. He looked up then at Stannis, and there was something like weary respect in the look. If you come to the city, come with a fleet. Do not come with words. The boy who sits the throne likes steel toys. I will come with law, Stannis said. If men will not open their gates to law, then I will bring the thing that opens gates. We have had both, Kevin remarked. One tends to bring the other along. They would have left the matter there. Men retiring to their corners, the hall exhaling and small traffic resuming, in a pattern as old as courts. But Melisandre stepped forward again, and this time she did not bother to ask permission of anyone. Kings do not only sit and wear, she said. They see. If this realm is to have a king, he must look up. She pointed to a brazier, one of the several that kept the hall from a freeze. Light that, she told a guard, and the guard looked at Stannis, not her. Stannis nodded warily, and the man tipped a coal into the brazier until it caught. The smoke smelled of resin and salt. Melisandre closed her eyes and opened them. In the flames, she said. I see men upon a wall as high as the sky, and their breaths are smoke that the wind tears away. I see white in the white and dead men walking. I see a boy with a wolf's name wearing black and a crown of snow. I see a hungry cold that ca. Residential nothing for the laws of men or the choice of a council. I see a gate in the north that has forgotten what it was built to keep out. Enough, Stannis murmured, but she had brushed the room now. Men who had never looked farther than their next harvest stared, as if the stones around them might hide winter's teeth. Septon Lucian made a pious sound that could have meant anything. Randall Tarley said, scorn heated by discomfort. And I see men with pots and sticks trying to frighten fools. Davos did not know what he believed. He knew the weight of a coin, the pull of a tide, and the sound a rope makes when it frays beyond bearing. He had seen something black and impossible come forth from the Red Woman and kill a man he respected upon a high wall no blade could touch. He knew that winter was a thing like law. Some years it was merciful, some years it was punitive, but it always came. Whether you see it in fire or in frost, he said, because no one else would. The Night's Watch sent men here. Let us hear them. If the North is to be devoured, it will not care whose circlet has which stone in it. Stannis's eyes moved to him, flint to flint. Then he gave the smallest nod. Send the Black brothers forward, he commanded. They were 2 men, and one of them had a half nose and the other had hands cracked from cold. They spoke without flourish and without the music men sometimes add to make their lies easier to swallow. They told of dead rangers and pale shapes that did not bleed when cut. They told of wildlings in numbers not seen in a lifetime. They told of a Lord Commander gone and a boy who had risen because someone had to stand. They spoke of ravens with messages and of gates that groaned. They did not ask for a king. They asked for men and for bread and for someone to remember that the end of the realm was not a line on a map but a wall you could touch. It became then the kind of talk that made men remember the weight of their own bodies, not just their banners. A Westerman said that it was all tales to scare children. A Reachman said that if half of it were true, the harvests would not matter in 2 years' time. Lord Yon Royce said that his father's father had told him stories that smelled like this, and that those who had lived long and far north did not laugh when they told them. Randall Tarley said that men would make any story a ghost to avoid the throat-cutting work that lay in front of them. Kevin Lannister said nothing and watched the flame. At last Stannis stood again, and Davos recognized that posture. He thought, now is the moment the king must decide whether to be the thing he has declared or simply to wear it. I called you here to choose in the open, Stannis said, and somehow his voice did more work after the choosing than before. You have chosen. I am king, that tastes of iron. I will not sweeten it. Now I will tell you what a king does. He keeps his realm. He does not sit fat in a warm chair and ask his men to bleed for his pride. He protects. There is a wall in the north, and it was built because a king named it necessary and men obeyed. If it falls, the realm falls. If it stands, perhaps we all have a chance to go on hating each other in comfort and dying in our beds. I will send men. I will go myself in a season. But first I will take what is mine, because a king without a throne is a horse without a rider. The beast runs and the stirrups drag in the dust. Storm's End stands. Davos found himself saying, Dragonstone stands. The fleet is yours. He did not say, the men may not be. He did not need to. Lord Mathis Rowan, who had stood for Stannis and done so without pleasure, spoke as if spitting out a bit of something caught between his teeth. If you will protect the faith and not drag us all to a foreign fire, he said, then Golden Grove will levy men. But I will not have my sons forced to renounce the statues in their September. Stannis's head turned slowly, not to Rowan but to Septon Lucian. Hear me, he said, and the words hung in the hall. I will not burn the 7. I will not burn seps. I will not burn idols. I will not burn men for praying. I am not a priest. I am a king. If you will bless my crown, I will protect your churches. If your God blesses me with victory, you may say your God did it. If the Red God gives me victory, the priestess will say hers did. Men will choose which story they like when they are drunk. I do not care so long as the realm stands. Melisandre did not blink. Davos was certain she was angry, but the anger only made the ruby seem to settle deeper upon her throat. A drop of blood sunken into skin. She said, "The true God is like a sun. You cannot look upon him without weeping and being changed." "Then I will have a visor for that too," Stannis said. "Enough. This council is adjourned. Those who would sign the witness of what we have done, do so now. Those who would eat, eat. Those who would send ravens, send them. Those who would whisper, whisper. Tomorrow I take oaths in the yard." Men brought tables forward and set the long parchments upon them. Valen produced sand. Septon Lucian brought a little box of wax seals that smelled of hive and summer. Lords came up and pressed their names and symbols. Kevin Lannister refused to sign and did so with a courtesy that stripped the refusal of offense and then set it back upon the table polished. Randall Tarley did not sign because he had said he would not. Lord Yohn Royce did sign, and his letters looked as if they had been hammered into the skin. In the yard later, Davos stood while oaths were taken. The wind bit, but the sky had cleared some while men had argued, and a thin blue line lay above the sea. It looked like hope remembered too late. Men swore by old gods and by new. A man from some godforsaken village swore by his mother's grave when he could not come up with any other god. Edric Storm put his hand to the iron of the gate and watched with eyes that ate men's faces. Ser Loras Tyrell watched the Red Woman, always, but he swore no oath and broke none. He stood with his grief as if it were a companion. On the third day the crossbowmen spoke. They named a man in King's Landing who had sold them to Osmond Kettleblack for a purse and a promise, and who had told them that there were other purses in the hall if they were quick. Osmond protested and laughed and threatened, and then went very white and very still when the dog, Edric's dog, was led to a cloak he had brushed against and licked it like a friend. Kevin Lannister looked at him for a long time and then said, "If the Kettleblacks hang, another set of cheaper knives will appear. When we act, we must act as if we mean to starve the whole city of such men." "You will have the chance," Stannis said, and in his mouth chance sounded like law. "Take your message to the rock. We will follow with our own." He turned then, a motion that took in Davos and Melisandre and Salador Saan and Archmaester Valen and Septon Lucian and Lord Yohn Royce and Brynden Tully and the boy with Baratheon blood and the dog without name. "Prepare. We sail when the wind is with us. The realm chose. It will see that choice made flesh. After that," he looked north. The good blue turned thin. "After that, we go where kings rarely go. We go to the wall." Davos walked out to the seaward parapet that night when the stones themselves sweated wet. The wind came up from the waves cold enough to clean a soul. He had not much of one to clean, or so he told himself on old, insomniac nights. Yet the wind did what it could. He heard boots and did not turn until the boots stopped near. He did not need to look to know it was the Red Woman. She stood with her palms against the merlin as if taking the measure of the rock's warmth, though there was none. "You have chained him to the seven for an hour," she said, not reproving and not forgiving either. "You have lengthened the shadow we all stand in. That is a clever thing for a man who pretends at plainness." "I do not pretend at anything," Davos said. "I may be a coward, but I am honest about it." "You are not a coward," Melisandre said. The lack of a smile made it almost gentle. "You do not know how many men I have seen looking at flames and not daring to speak the words they see because the words will make the thing true. You spoke. You have made my king give a promise to a god who will not save him when the hour comes." "The hour comes for everyone," Davos said. He thought of a boy with snow in his hair. He thought of a gate groaning under a weight no gate should bear. "All I want is for that hour not to come under a burning roof with children screaming." Men are strange. The sea made a noise like laughter then, and she turned to it as if it were a thing that had spoken to her in a language only she knew. "You cut onions and hands and stories, and you are surprised when you find blood on the knife. There is always blood on knives," Davos said. "The trick is to have it be your own when you look down." She studied him for a time that had no place to sit and then said, almost conversationally, "You think I killed the king's brother. I think I saw a thing I cannot understand, and I think I know which room that thing walked from. I think a man died under a sky that did not help him. He did not say the rest. He did not say that he could throw her off the wall and she would fall and perhaps she would break and perhaps she would not. He did not say that he did not want to. "We will go north," she said. "He will be more himself there. The cold bites. Fire warms. That is the simple of it." "You think nothing is simple until it suits you to pretend it is," Davos said, and then wished he had kept that bolt in his pocket and not fired it. But she only laughed softly, and the sound was not unlovely. In the morning, men worked with urgency. Sailcloth was checked and lines coiled and coiled again by habit. Numbers were counted and then recounted and then guessed at in a more flattering manner and then made honest because Davos looked at them. Salador San sang an obscene shanty in 4 languages and threw a purse of his own coin to a boy who clambered aloft quick enough to kiss a gull's tail. Lord Yon Royce took his leave with a weight of duty and the sort of parting only a man who intends to return indulges in. Brynden Tully simply went with a nod like a door closing. Ser Loras stood before Stannis without bowing or helping himself to insolence. "If you killed him," he said. "I did not," Stannis said. "If you killed him," Loras repeated as if refusing the gift. "If I find that you did, there is not a council in any castle in the world that will keep me from you." Stannis's eyes did not blink. "Find the truth," he said. "Let it be in the open. Then come." They could have sailed that day, but the wind chose to be obstinate, and perhaps it did not like the smell of councils either. On the second day the wind turned, as winds do when they have been persuaded by something larger than themselves. The fleet went out like grackles, black and numerous and noisy. Davos took his place on the Fury, with the spray knitting his beard into ugly ropes and his heart doing a thing he had not taught it, hoping for something beyond mere survival. Letters went ahead, copies of the witness and the list of those who stood, written reasonably and with Archmaester's care. When such letters reach cities, they do work like moles. They undermine walls before the battering ram arrives. Kevin Lannister arrived before the letters did, and perhaps that mattered more. He walked into the Red Keep with the dust of the Stormlands still upon him and the knowledge of 100 eyes upon his back, and he said in his brother's chamber, "I saw men stand in a hall and name themselves, and you cannot pretend they did not." In Storm's End the hall was cold in their absence. Edric Storm skittered through the aisles, with the dog at his heels, and counted candles. Melisandre watched the braziers and smiled at a future only she could see. Pylus sat with a quill behind his ear and composed 3 letters to the Citadel in his mind, none of which would ever fully become paper. The sea raised and lowered itself as it always had, and if it had an opinion about men's councils, it kept it. When the sails dwindled on the horizon, Davos leaned upon the rail. "What happens if we take the city?" he asked Stannis, because he must. "What happens if we do not?" "If we take it," Stannis said, "I will shut the exchequer and open it again honest. I will put men who know grain to counting it and men who know coin to stacking it and men who know bells to appeasing the mob. I will tell the faith that their great sept may stand so long as they keep their swords in their scabbards. I will hang 3 men to remind the rest that councils are not theaters. I will knight you again. Then we will sail north." Davos looked at the foam. "And if we do not take it? Then we will sail north faster," Stannis said. He turned his head and the sapphire on his brow caught a weak light and flung it back like a knife. By the time the fleet made Blackwater Bay, the letters had done their work and had not done it enough. Tyrion Lannister had laid his traps, the black pitch swilling in the river like a secret, and the Redwyne fleet hovered and did not commit, and the Tyrell roses hung their scent close. Varys whispered in the corners and a boy king sharpened his smiles. But something else was different. On the city walls men looked down and whispered to one another words that had been spoken in Storm's End. And when men whisper the same words often enough, those words become a shape. When the first casks of green hell bloomed like devils and the river went to fire, the men in the Stormlands ships had one thing they would not have had. They had looked upon their king sitting in open hall, and they had seen old men and proud men say yes. When the slaughter came they still died. But some did not leap overboard. Some rode through flame. Some gritted their teeth and brought the fury where Davos told them to bring her because they believed they were more than a plume in a lord's helmet. The river burned and spit itself into the sky because that is what wildfire does when a dwarf with a head full of fear becomes a general. Men choked on the smoke. The air itself tasted of coin melted and poured down throats. Davos's oarsmen pulled until they bled and then pulled more. Somewhere to his right he heard Salador singing, because the Lysine always sang when dying was near. The chain came up green and wicked. It rattled through water like a snake waking belatedly. Davos's heart collapsed upon itself and then grew. "Back!" he roared. A voice no longer any man's but a storm's. And the men backed and the river pretended to allow. The chain took others. The fire took others. The arrows took yet more. And yet, on the north bank, where the mud waited and the city wall looked down, the gold cloaks were fewer than they had been. Some had gone to the sept to kneel. Some had remembered an oath that was not to a boy. Some had remembered that the man who had stood on the dais was a thing not to be mocked. The gate did not open, king's gates rarely do, but it creaked. Creaked, and that was something. They did not take the city that day. Stannis fell back because the river taught him that law takes ships as readily as it takes men. He stood on a deck scorched black and counted ships that no longer had names. He said little. He never said much. He looked at the sky and then he looked north. The choice had been made in a hall. The next choice belonged to weather and men and things that walked where they should not. They sailed. It was a slow sailing, for a fleet that has been lamed is like a man with one arm. It rose but it remembers when it had two. Salador San counted his losses and his gains and found that he had lost more than coin and did not know what to do with that. Davos sat with his feet splayed and his hands blistered and thought of how a man can carry law like a lamp. It does not stop arrows, but it lets you see the arrow coming sometimes. On a morning with a sky the color of iron and the sea complaining under its breath, Stannis came to the foredeck where Davos sat and said, "You saved my leg." Davos shrugged, a movement unsuited to men of rank. "I saved your counsel, your grace. One bolt in your thigh and there are men enough who would say the gods had spoken. Do you believe gods speak? I believe men do." He looked at the king. "Set a man to counting stones and he will end a grave digger." Stannis's mouth did a thing almost like amusement and then gave it up. "We go where there is a wall," he said. "You said they sent men. We will be men to send. We will get there late. We are always late. Late is better than never, only when there remains something to be late for." "Late with law," Davos said, and that made the corner of Stannis's mouth twitch again, which was a sort of miracle. "I'll count the oars, your grace. The men row better if they know someone is counting." He watched the king go. He watched the spray write the story of the prow's cutting. He thought of a hall full of men forced to speak up and be seen. He thought of an old lord of the Vale who had reminded them that the first laws were made by men afraid of strangers and wolves, and now the wolves wore men's faces more often than not. Storm's End sank behind them into the gray that swallows everything in its time. In the brazier in the king's cabin that night, Melisandre watched and frowned again in turn, as if the fire were telling her a story that would not end where she wanted it to. The boy with the dog slept, tired from counting sails and from dreaming of crowns he would never wear and from being loved by no one who could afford to love him. Septon Lucian confessed to his god a half-belief in another's god, and Archmaester Valen composed a treatise in his head about the peculiar tumult of the age and the resurgence of councils in sovereign matters, and fell asleep before he could write even the first sentence. In a hall in King's Landing, Kevin Lannister told his brother that men had stood in Storm's End and said the name Stannis aloud, and Tywin Lannister set his fingers upon a table and did nothing for a very long time. In a litter en route to the Red Keep, a veil lifted for a moment and a pair of old, bright eyes saw a city that believed three things at once and did not die of the contradiction. In the Red Keep's sept, a young queen caught a reflection of her son's face in a golden plate and did not recognize him at first. Her fingers tightened and blood pricked her palm where the sharp work caught her. The realm had chosen in the open. It did not make men good. It did not make them brave. But it made them known. There is power in knowing. The next storm, when it came, would come with snow in it and strange eyes. Men would stand on a wall and make their choices with their feet and their frozen fingers. A king would walk among them like law wrapped in a cloak, he could not afford to lose. A smuggler would count fires and faces and oaths and hope. He had not burdened his soul with this law in vain. And when all those choices crashed together and fell as wave upon wave falls, the sea would do what it had always done. Shout and withdraw, refuse to be impressed by castles and kings and councils alike. Seasons turned in men's hearts long before they turned in the sky. Davos felt the first ice of the next thing take hold and knew that the work of keeping faith would be only harder under a pale sun. The ship's bell rang. The sailors twisted their wrists and took the oar's weight. Stannis leaned into the wind and said nothing. Above them all, invisible and indifferent, a gull rode a current, king of nothing and master of more seas than any man would ever count.